square in the eyes and said, I just really want you to know how much I love you. And I looked at him and I said, what is wrong with you? And I went to get my gloves or whatever it was, and he went skipping along, and I went, what in the world was that all about? And it was very outstandingly strange for him and for our interaction and for any interaction I've ever seen him have. I went to the parade. We were ready to step off. I looked over. My mother was there. The band leader pulled me off, and he said, you need to go to the funeral home. Your brother is dead. And it was very difficult for me to believe that. I thought he was always, falling out of trees and crashing his skateboard. And I thought, well, okay. And my mother was a professional overreactor. So I thought, well, okay, something happened. But lo and behold, he was dead. And I believe that he knew that was happening. But I didn't have any frame of reference for that. And I can't say that I knew it was happening. If I had gotten out of my own little tunnel vision, whatever petty thing was bothering me at the time, and could have looked at that, I might have been able to pick that up well as well. It was big enough that I did understand something was different and something was going on. When I started to think about that and what death was after my dad left, I started getting other beings that were no longer in a body talking to me, which was not really welcome, and it was not really expected, and it was actually quite strange and quite disconcerting. I had gotten off a plane one time. I was coming home. I'd been gone for a couple of weeks, and there was a big poster on this pillar outside while we were waiting for the car to pick us up. And it was a little girl, missing, please help. And I glanced at the poster, and I heard this little girl's voice say, oh my God, can you hear me? And I'm looking around for a little girl, and there's no little girl there. And I said to my husband, did you just hear a little girl's voice? And he said, no. And I said, oh, and she said, you did hear me. And I went, okay. I hear a little girl's voice, and she's talking to me, and she thinks I hear her. And my husband said, well, obviously you do. I went, oh, okay. So we got in the car, and I said, are you talking to me? And she said, yes, you hear me. And I said, well, I guess. Who are you? And she said, you looked at my picture on the poster. And I said, you're the little missing girl? And she said, yes. She said, can you tell my parents I'm dead? And I said, no, I can't tell your parents you're dead. How do I know you're dead? And she said, well, you're talking to me. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. This is very strange. And so she told me what happened, and that it was she and a little girlfriend of hers. She was 12. And she described the men who kidnapped them, and that their bodies were in an old abandoned army base near where my husband and I lived, in the same general area, this region. And what had happened, what these men did to these little girls, which was horrible. And she said her parents were so upset. Please, please, you've got to tell them that I'm dead, but that I'm okay. And I'm there and I'm talking to them, but they can't hear me. So I said, I really don't know how I feel about this. And we got home, and sure enough, they hadn't found the bodies, and they didn't know there were two little girls, and I couldn't do it. And I'm not proud of that at all. I'm sort of being upfront with you here about the experience. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't picture myself walking into the sheriff's department and saying, hello. So I got off the plane, and she actually told me where she is and what happened and everything. And I could not even imagine being taken seriously saying that. And the whole experience was very, very odd for me. But as it unfolded, they found the other little girl was missing. They found, as the weeks progressed, they found the bodies. Exactly what she told me was true. They ended up finding the men exactly the way she described them to me was true. And it had quite an impact on me. It was before I started embracing this thing I do as real and having any concept of reality associated with this. So once I did start embracing this, Jose Silva, the man who really made me accept it, I was at my computer one evening and I heard him, and he came in and he said, "Well, I'm gone. I've left." And I went downstairs to my husband and I said, "I think Jose just left." And he said, "How do you know?" And I said, "He stopped by to say goodbye." And in the morning, we got a news email release that Jose had passed in the night. So I started really understanding that that's not it. We don't just leave. We're not dead, gone, bye-bye. And I was able to start accessing dead people and start talking to dead people. And I do not act as a medium. I do not act as any kind of a channeler like that. If somebody needs to speak with a dead one, you don't need me for that. You actually don't need anybody else for that. I can show you how to do it, because what you want to do is talk to them. You don't want to hear what I have to say. You want to hear from them. But I can, with all of the conviction in my personal experience and all of the conviction from what I've been able to do and access in the Morgana materials, tell you absolutely that we do not end when we leave these bodies. Our lives are so much more than that. They're so much more beautiful than that. They're so much more powerful than that. They're so much more alive than that. We are life, and life does not cease to exist. It changes shape, it changes form, it changes focus, but it does not cease.